Imagine Chilation. Imagine ticked New York. The year is 1777. It is October. The air is cold, genuinely cold, the kind that gets inside your coat and stays there, that makes the muscles in your jaw ache, and the ground beneath your boots is soft from 2 days of rain. Around you the world is burning, not metaphorically, literally. Musket fire crackles through the tree line to your left, and somewhere behind the smoke a cannon roars so loudly that the sound isn't just sound, it hits you in the chest like a fist. Men are shouting, men are screaming. The two sounds are remarkably similar when they're far enough away. The forest smells like gunpowder and wet leaves and something darker underneath that your brain tries not to name. And then through all of it, through the noise and the smoke and the particular terror of a battle you might not survive, a single rider comes exploding out of the trees on a dark horse, and even from 100 yards away you can feel it. The energy, the absolute, reckless, almost insane forward momentum of someone who has decided that death is a problem for later. His name is Benedict Arnold. He has just been ordered to stay back at headquarters. He has just defied that order completely. He is riding straight into the heaviest fighting, screaming for the men to follow him. And here is the thing, they follow him. Of course they follow him. They always follow him. Because Benedict Arnold in battle is something the English language barely has a word for. He is a force. He is a kind of organized chaos that somehow, impossibly, turns into victory. In the next hour, he will lead charges that break the British line. He will have his horse shot out from under him. When that horse falls, it will land on his leg, the same leg that was shattered at Quebec 2 years before. The same leg he was still limping on when he got here, and the bone will shatter again, and he will lie in the mud in screaming agony, and even then, he will refuse to let the surgeon amputate it, because he needs that leg. He has plans for that leg. He has plans for everything. The Battle of Saratoga would be called by some historians the turning point of the American Revolution, the victory that brought France into the war, the victory that made the United States of America possible, and the man most responsible for it, the man who turned the tide, was Benedict Arnold. Here's what nobody tells you about Benedict Arnold. The most famous traitor in American history was also, for a long time, its greatest hero. And the distance between those two things, between hero and traitor, between legend and villain, is not a gap you fall into by accident. It is a road, and someone had to build it, brick by brick, insult by insult, betrayal by betrayals, though not always the betrayals you've been taught to remember. Stay with me tonight, because the story of Benedict Arnold is not the story you know. Before we go any further, if you found your way to Echoes of History tonight, wherever you are, whatever brought you here, I'm genuinely glad you're listening. A lot of people find this channel in the dark, lying in bed, trying to quiet a mind that doesn't want to stop. That's exactly what this is for. That's exactly why we make these. If you haven't subscribed yet to Echoes of History, would you do that now? It takes 2 seconds, and it means the next time your thoughts won't slow down. There'll be something new waiting for you. It genuinely means more than you know. And if you feel like leaving a comment, I love this part. Tell me where you are and what time it is. A bedroom in Ohio at 2 in the morning. A flat in London just before dawn. A night shift somewhere cold. I read every single one, and I find something quietly amazing about all of us lying here in the dark together, listening to the same old strange world. Here is what most people think they know about Benedict Arnold. They think they know a simple story. A story about a man who sold out his country for money and spite, who handed a fortress over to the enemy, who got found out at the last second, who fled to the British and lived out his days in well-deserved shame. A coward. A villain. A man whose name became a synonym for treachery, so completely that for 2.5 centuries calling someone a Benedict Arnold has meant exactly one thing. That story isn't wrong. Exactly. The facts of the treason are real. In 1780, Benedict Arnold did attempt to hand over the fortress of West Point to the British. He did accept money for it, nearly £10,000. He was found out. He did flee. He did fight for the British afterward, burning American towns in Virginia and Connecticut. And yes, he burned his own home state of Connecticut, which is the kind of detail history has a hard time forgiving. All of that is true. But here's where the common story starts to dissolve. Most people imagine Benedict Arnold as a man who was always somehow rotten at the center, a climber, an opportunist, someone who wrapped himself in the flag for personal gain and then discarded it the moment something better came along. The traitor narrative, as it has been handed down, is a story about character, about a fundamental flaw that was always there, waiting to surface. But the historical record tells a different story, not a simpler one, a stranger one, a more human one. The Benedict Arnold who existed before the treason was genuinely remarkable. He was born in 1741 in Norwich, Connecticut, into a family that had once been prosperous and was, by his childhood, in the process of falling apart. His father, also named Benedict, was a drinker, a serious, ruinous, public kind of drinker, and the shame of that in a colonial New England town was not a small thing. Young Benedict watched his family's name go from respected to pitied to quietly mocked, and that watching left a mark on him. You don't spend your formative years watching a parent destroy a legacy without developing a very specific, very complicated relationship with reputation. He was apprenticed as a teenager to an apothecary, a druggist essentially, and he was good at it, but good enough wasn't what Benedict Arnold was after. By his mid-20s he had established himself as a merchant and ship captain in New Haven, trading up and down the Atlantic coast and into the Caribbean. He was sharp, he was aggressive, he was occasionally willing to bend the law in ways that were common practice for merchants of his era, but that his enemies would later use against him. He built something from nothing. He was proud of what he built. That pride mattered enormously, more than people understood at the time and more than most historians have given credit for since. When the revolution came, Arnold didn't hesitate. He was in it immediately, viscerally, with the kind of total commitment that suggests the revolution gave him something he had been looking for, a cause large enough to match his ambition, a stage worthy of what he believed himself to be. The evidence of what he believed himself to be is everywhere in the early record. At Ticonderoga in May of 1775, Arnold helped lead the capture of a British fortress with barely a shot fired, a crucial early victory. He then organized, essentially from scratch, an expedition through the Maine wilderness to attack Quebec. It was one of the most audacious military plans of the entire war. Most military historians, looking at it now, agree it probably shouldn't have worked at all. It very nearly did. In the Quebec assault, Arnold was shot through the leg. He kept fighting. He was eventually forced to retreat. He was then put in charge of building an entirely new fleet on Lake Champlain, a fleet that he designed, that he cajoled men into building, that he trained men to sail. And at the Battle of Valcour Island in 1776, he used that fleet to hold off a vastly superior British naval force long enough to delay the entire British invasion of New York by a year. He lost almost every ship he had. He fought until the last possible moment, then ran his remaining ships aground, set them on fire, marched his men through the forest in the dark, and escaped. Strategically, it was a brilliant defeat. The delay it brought was, according to many historians, essential to the survival of the revolution. George Washington said as much. Everyone said as much. And then Congress promoted 5 other generals over him. 5 men who had not done what he had done. Think about that for a second. The wound from the congressional snub ran deeper than almost anything else in Arnold's story. And to understand why, you have to understand what kind of man he was in the way that his contemporaries understood it. There are officers in every war who do their duty and go home, who measure the cost of service against the cost of sacrifice and find a reasonable equilibrium. And then there are men like Benedict Arnold, men for whom war is not a duty but an expression, men who come alive in crisis, men who in the chaos and terror of battle are not diminished but expanded. His contemporaries wrote about Arnold with a specific vocabulary: brilliant, daring, reckless, magnificent. The kind of language you use for someone who frightens you a little, even when he's on your side. He was also, by every account, exhausting, combative, quick to take offense, unable to let a slight pass. He fought with officers above him and below him. He submitted expense accounts that were disputed. He was accused of improper use of military resources. Some of the accusations were probably fair. Some were almost certainly political. The distinction barely mattered, because Arnold treated every accusation, fair or unfair, as a mortal insult requiring complete vindication. You start to see the shape of it. A man who defined himself by his valor, by his willingness to sacrifice more than anyone else, by the recognition he believed that sacrifice deserved, and a continental army bureaucracy that was chaotic, underfunded, politically fractured, and not even close to capable of delivering the kind of consistent, reliable recognition that a man like Arnold required. The winter of 1777 to 1778 was a turning point that most people don't know about. While Washington's army froze at Valley Forge, and yes, Arnold was there still commanding, still limping on his shattered leg, he was simultaneously fighting a court-martial on charges of improperly using army wagons and favoring certain merchants in Philadelphia. He had been appointed military governor of Philadelphia after the British left, and he had made enemies almost immediately. He threw parties. He lived expensively. He fell in love with Peggy Shippen, a young woman from a Loyalist family, 19 years old to his 37, beautiful and intelligent and deeply connected to British social circles. The court-martial cleared him of most charges, but delivered a formal reprimand. Washington was required to sign it, and something in the image of his commanding general being compelled to formally reprimand him for minor misdeeds, while 5 junior men held ranks he deserved, something in that broke something loose. Here's what the evidence actually shows. Arnold's first contact with the British wasn't purely ideological. There are letters, coded letters, that historians have worked to decrypt, and the tone of them is not that of a man with a grand political conviction. It is the tone of a man negotiating, a man saying, "What is my sacrifice worth to you?" A man who had spent years asking that question of the Continental Congress and receiving insufficient answers, now asking it of someone else. Peggy Shippen was almost certainly instrumental, not as a simple villain, but as a connection, a social bridge to the British officer John Andre, who would become Arnold's handler, and eventually one of the most tragic figures in the entire story. She had known Andre in Philadelphia. She facilitated the introduction. Whether she fully understood what she was facilitating, historians still debate. John Andre was 29 years old, charming, an excellent sketch artist, a writer of light verse, beloved by everyone who met him. He and Arnold communicated in code, in invisible ink, in letters disguised as commercial correspondence. Andre used the name John Anderson. Arnold used the name Monk. For 2 years, they exchanged information that grew steadily more serious, while Arnold worked to get himself appointed commander of West Point. West Point in 1780 was not the academy it would later become. It was a fortress on the Hudson River, a chain of redoubts and fortifications that controlled the single most important strategic waterway in North America. Whoever held West Point held the ability to split the American states in two. Arnold got the appointment, and then he began, carefully and systematically, to undermine the fortress's defenses, reducing the garrison, sending critical men elsewhere, failing to make repairs, distributing the forces in ways that would make a surprise attack devastating rather than repulsible. The exchange was set. Arnold would surrender West Point. The British would pay. Andre would come ashore to finalize the plans. And then everything went wrong. The night of September 21st, 1780. Andre comes ashore from the British ship Vulture near Haverstraw, New York. He meets Arnold. They go over the plans, real, detailed plans, in Arnold's own handwriting, folded into Andre's stockings. Then the British ship is fired on by American artillery and forced to withdraw. Andre cannot return to his ship. He has to go back overland through American-controlled territory. He is stopped by 3 militiamen, not soldiers. Militiamen, irregular fighters, men who may have been out looking for plunder as much as enemy combatants. They find the papers in his stockings. They know what they have. They don't ransom it back, which Andre reportedly offered. They turn it in. The moment the papers reach American command, a rider is sent to warn West Point, and that same rider passes close enough to Arnold's headquarters that Arnold is warned first. He has maybe 45 minutes. He tells Peggy he has to go. He rides to the river. He boards a small boat, transfers to the British ship Vulture, and is gone. His aide-de-camp, Alexander Hamilton, arrives at the house shortly after. He finds Peggy in apparent hysteria, screaming that there were hot irons on her head, convinced that everyone was there to murder her baby. Hamilton, 23 years old and deeply moved, spent an hour comforting her. Whether Peggy Arnold was genuinely hysterical or giving the performance of her life is a question historians have never fully resolved. She was returned to her family in Philadelphia and later expelled from Pennsylvania as a loyalist. She eventually rejoined Arnold in British-controlled New York, then London, then New Brunswick. She outlived him by 3 years. John Andre was not so fortunate. He was tried by a military tribunal with Washington's approval, with Hamilton arguing unsuccessfully for his release, and hanged as a spy on October 2nd, 1780. He was 29 years old. He went to the gallows with more composure than almost anyone watching could maintain. His last words reportedly were, "I pray you to bear me witness that I meet my fate like a brave man." He adjusted the noose himself. Washington could not watch. Andre's body was eventually exhumed decades later and reinterred in Westminster Abbey near the Tomb of Kings. Arnold, in the meantime, had received his payment, not the full amount he'd negotiated since the plan had failed, and was given a commission as a British brigadier general. He was not trusted. He was not loved. The British found him useful and kept him at arm's length. He led raids on Virginia and Connecticut. He burned New London, Connecticut. He burned warehouses, ships, homes. He burned the town where he had grown up. Reports from the time say that when British officers entered New London, they found the name Benedict Arnold written on walls and doors throughout the town, not in tribute, as a curse, painted there by the people whose homes he was about to destroy. Here is where history does something quietly extraordinary. Here is where it gets strange. Most narratives of betrayal follow a clean arc. The traitor acts. The traitor is condemned. The traitor is punished. The world goes back to what it was before, now fortified with a lesson. But Benedict Arnold didn't get punished in any conventional sense. He survived. He lived until 1801, long enough to see the United States become the thing it became. He died in London at 60. He never returned to America. His wife and children lived beside him the whole time. He was, by most accounts, devoted to his family in ways that complicated the simple villain narrative. He mourned Andre openly for years. He wrote long, self-justifying letters that were never fully convincing, and were clearly never really intended to convince anyone but himself. What is the nature of a regret that cannot be spoken? Because that's what you sense in the Arnold archives, not the satisfaction of a man who made a calculated choice and lived with it cleanly, but the particular misery of a man who got what he thought he wanted and then had to carry the weight of what that wanting had cost. He had wanted recognition. He had wanted value. He had wanted someone, anyone, to look at what he had given and say, yes, that was worth something. He got money. He got a British uniform. He got the knowledge that John Andre had died for his plan. He got 2.5 centuries of being the worst name in American history. Washington, writing after the treason was discovered, said something that has always stopped me. He said he was deeply hurt, not surprised, not shocked. Hurt, as though some part of him had understood what Arnold needed and known, quietly, that the army could not provide it, and had grieved that knowledge before it became catastrophe. Here's the connection that most histories miss entirely. The story of Benedict Arnold is not primarily a story about loyalty or disloyalty, about patriotism or its absence. It is a story about recognition, about what we owe the people who sacrifice for us, and what happens when that debt goes unpaid. The Continental Congress was not uniquely cruel to Arnold. It was chaotically, structurally incapable of adequately recognizing anyone. Soldiers went unpaid for months. Officers resigned in frustration. Washington himself wrote letter after letter to Congress begging for the basic resources to keep an army in the field. But Arnold was different from the others who suffered those same indignities. The others found a way to hold on, through idealism, through community, through a vision of what they were building that was larger than any personal injury. Arnold couldn't do that, not because he was uniquely corrupt, but because the injury went too deep, too personal, too close to the wound his father had left him, the wound of watching a reputation collapse, of watching what you built dissolve, of understanding that the world does not automatically honor what you have sacrificed for it. He needed the revolution to be a transaction. He needed what he gave to be measured and returned. And when it wasn't, when it was deferred and disputed and deprioritized in the chaotic machinery of a war-ravaged continental government, he found someone else to make the transaction with. There is a version of this story in which a slightly different Continental Congress, a slightly more attentive command structure, a single letter of genuine gratitude arriving at the right moment, changes everything. Changes Saratoga and Valley Forge and West Point, and John Andre's life, and Benedict Arnold's name. History is full of these near misses, these almost difference. They're worth sitting with. The leg that Arnold refused to have amputated at Saratoga never healed properly. He walked with a limp for the rest of his life. When he was buried in 1801 in the crypt of St. No, Mary's Church in Battersea, London, he was interred in his old Continental Army uniform, the one he had worn as an American general, not the British one he'd been given later. Some accounts say this was his specific request, that even at the end, some part of him needed to be buried as what he had been before he became what he became. I think about that a lot. The man who burned New London in a British uniform, going into the ground dressed as an American hero. The contradiction held, unresolved, right down to the last possible moment. What does that tell us about identity, about self-understanding, about the stories we need to tell ourselves about who we are? There is something almost unbearably human in it. We are all, in some way, more than one thing. We are all, in some way, the person we were before the choices that defined us, and the person we became after them, both simultaneously, neither cancelling the other out. Arnold carried Saratoga into his grave alongside West Point. He carried the dark horse and the burning leg and the men who followed him into the worst of the fighting. And he carried also the coded letters and the folded plans in Andre's stockings and the sound of New London burning. We prefer our histories clean. We prefer heroes to stay heroes, and villains to stay villains, and for the meaning to be legible and simple, and to teach a lesson we already know. But the world is not accommodating in this way. The world keeps producing people like Benedict Arnold, people who are genuinely more than one thing, who leave us without the comfortable categories we need to make sense of them. The Continental Army soldiers who followed him up that hillside at Saratoga, who who watched him ride into the fire on a dark horse, who matched his recklessness with their own, who won that battle. They worshipped him. And 3 years later, the same men would curse his name, not because he had become someone different, but because he had always been someone they couldn't fully see. Maybe no one could. Maybe not even himself. There is something in this story that is specifically about the body. Stay with me here because I think this matters. Benedict Arnold's military genius was physical. It was in the body, in the willingness to put himself where the bullets were, in the absolute refusal to manage a battle from a distance, in the instinct that said the only way to lead was to be the most visibly, recklessly present person on the field. That worked. It produced extraordinary results. It also cost him enormously physically. 2 shattered legs, constant pain, a limp that never went away. A body that had been used up in service of a cause that then debated whether it had been used up quite properly enough to warrant a promotion. There is something in that specifically modern, isn't there? The body that gives everything and then waits to see what it gets back. The injury that doesn't get properly acknowledged. The sacrifice that is real and measurable and documented, somehow still subject to negotiation. We do this now. We do this to athletes who leave their bodies on the field and are then traded or released or simply not thanked. We do this to workers whose physical labor builds things that they will never own. We do this to caregivers and soldiers and first responders, people who use their bodies in extraordinary service and then discover that the transaction was never quite as clear as they thought it was. Arnold's demand for recognition was not irrational. It was almost exactly what we would expect from someone in his position. What made it catastrophic was the particular combination of his temperament, the inability to absorb a slight and continue anyway, the need for vindication that never quite became acceptance, and a system that was too broken and too overwhelmed to deliver what he needed. Neither of those things alone makes a traitor. Together they did. There is also something here about what ambition does to us when it goes unchecked. Not in a moralistic way. I'm not suggesting Arnold should have wanted less. His ambition produced Ticonderoga and Quebec and Valcour Island and Saratoga. It produced things that mattered. But ambition that is always oriented outward, toward recognition, toward rank, toward what others think of us, is ambition with no flaw. There is never a moment of sufficient satisfaction, because the satisfaction is always contingent on something external providing it, and external things are unreliable. External things, Congress, command structure, public opinion, are spectacularly, historically unreliable. The people who survived the same structural injustices that broke Arnold, the officers who are also passed over, also underpaid, also disputed and dismissed, seem to have had something he didn't. Not superior character necessarily, maybe just a different source of the thing they were fighting for, something that couldn't be taken away by a congressional committee, something internal. What do we hold on to when the world doesn't give us back what we've given it? The question has been around as long as sacrifice has. The answer is different for everyone. Arnold's answer, when the time came, was to find a different world to make the transaction with, and the price of that transaction was everything he had built, his name, his legacy, his place in the story. He got the money. He lost the meaning. And you sense, reading the late letters, the posthumous accounts, the small details of a man buried in a uniform he had betrayed, he knew the difference. The room where you are right now. Think about it for a moment. The quiet of it, the weight of the blankets, if there are blankets, the particular dark behind your eyelids. There is a long distance between you and the autumn field and Saratoga, nearly 250 years. The world that Benedict Arnold lived in, the world of wooden ships and muskets and coded letters written in invisible ink, is so far away that it might as well be another planet, and yet you have felt what he felt. Not the specific grief of a congressional snub maybe, not the specific pain of a shattered leg refusing to heal, but the particular ache of giving something, really giving it, using yourself up in service of something you believed in, and discovering that the accounting was different on the other end, that what you gave and what you got back didn't balance the way you needed them to. You have felt the thing that happens when you hold a version of yourself, a brave, capable, extraordinary version, and watch the world treat that version as ordinary, as insufficient, as not quite enough. Arnold's response to that feeling was catastrophic. That's the honest accounting. The treason was real. The damage was real. John Andre is still buried in Westminster Abbey, and the name Benedict Arnold is still a synonym for betrayal, and none of that is undone by understanding it, but the feeling underneath the response. That is not unique to a general in the Continental Army in 1779. That feeling is in this room right now, in whatever form it takes in your life. And it is worth sitting with that, in the dark, before sleep, not to excuse anything, just to recognize it. The need to be seen, the need to have what you've given acknowledged, the need for the transaction to be fair. Those needs are old, older than Benedict Arnold, older than America. They are needs that have shaped more history than any army ever did. And they are needs that, when they go unmet long enough in the wrong person in the wrong circumstances, can change everything. The question that history asks us through Arnold is not really whether he was a hero or a villain. The question is, what do we owe each other? What do we owe the people who sacrifice for us? And what is the cost of failing to answer that question well? We are still answering it. We answer it every day, in small ways, in the way we treat the people who give us things, their labor, their loyalty, their care, their bodies. The revolution that Arnold helped win was a revolution about exactly that question. What do people owe each other? What is the fair exchange? What happens when the powerful take more than their share? He helped build a country premised on those ideas, and then was consumed by the failure of that country to live up to them. In his own small, specific case, there is something in that, something almost operatic in its irony, that I find impossible to set down cleanly, so I won't. I'll let it sit. The world is getting quieter now. If you've been following along, you've travelled a long way tonight. From a smoky battlefield in October, to a coded letter written in invisible ink, to a man going into the ground in the wrong uniform, you've been somewhere strange and real and very human. Let all of it slow down now. The details can dissolve. The names, the dates, the battles, the politics, they don't need to stay with you into sleep. What stays is just the feeling. The weight of a human life that was more than one thing, the understanding that history is not made by simple people making simple choices, but by complicated people in impossible situations doing the best and worst they could. Breathe. Your body is doing something ancient right now, the muscles letting go, the jaw unclenching, the shoulders dropping by fractions of an inch. Humans have been doing this for as long as there have been humans. Lying down in the dark at the end of a day and releasing the weight of it. Arnold's soldiers did this. The men who followed him up the hill at Saratoga, they lay down in their tents that October night with musket smoke still in their hair and the ringing of cannon still in their ears, and they let the day go. They didn't know they had just won the revolution. They just knew they were tired. They knew the ground was cold and the blanket wasn't warm enough, and sleep was coming anyway, like it always does. Think about how many fires have burned in the dark, how many people have stared at the ceiling of wherever they were sleeping and tried to make sense of what they had lived through. The Continental soldier, the loyalist family packing their belongings, Peggy Arnold in an upstairs room holding her baby, deciding what role to play in the next scene. John Andre, the night before his trial, writing a letter, drawing a self-portrait by candlelight that has survived in the archives. A young man who knew what was coming and decided to face it with grace. All of those candles are out now. All of those people are returned to the same quiet, the same dark, the same breath dissolving into sleep. You are doing what they did. What all of them did, what people have always done. Let the story rest. Let your body rest. The stars outside, if you could see them, are the same stars that were there above the field at Saratoga, above the Hudson River on the night Andre came ashore, above the Atlantic crossing Arnold made to London, never to return. The same sky stretched over all of it, over everything that has ever happened and everyone who ever lived it, and over you right now at this exact hour, breathing out into the dark. Sleep now. If you made it to the end of this one, thank you. Genuinely. Spending time with echoes of history means something, and I don't say that lightly. If this episode helped you drift off, or if it taught you something about Benedict Arnold that you didn't expect, something that made the story feel more human and more strange than the version you learned in school, a like really does help this channel reach people who need a quiet place to land at night. It takes 1 second and it means more than you'd think. Leave a comment if you feel like it, your location, the time, whatever's on your mind. I read every single one. There is something I genuinely love about the geography of these nights. Someone in a small town in Ohio, someone in a high-rise in Tokyo, someone on a night shift in a hospital in Manchester, all of us in the dark together listening to the same old complicated world. Subscribing to Echoes of History makes sure you never miss a night like this one. There's always something new waiting. Another story that's stranger than you knew, another person, history got slightly wrong, another night that needs filling with something worth listening to. And if you ever want to support the work more directly, there's a channel membership, a quiet, no-pressure way to keep these stories coming. Every bit of support makes the next episode possible. Now, close your eyes if they aren't already closed. Humans have been lying down in the dark and telling each other stories since before anyone thought to write them down, since before there were candles or campfires or anything to push back the night except a voice and the willingness to listen. You are part of that. You have always been part of that. Sleep well.